How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today's video we are of course looking at equipment and the types of equipment, the sorts of equipment that you'll be wanting to use on various different tanks, giving you some examples of what equipment is going to be the best for each case, so that maybe if you don't fully understand the equipment itself, or maybe you're trying to find out what vehicle should have what equipment, or what is a novel and unique equipment that might be really useful on certain vehicles, well, this video is hopefully going to cover everything that you need to know about each piece of equipment. And yeah, let's get straight into it. And I guess we can start with the basic equipment and the typical kind of bonuses that they all give, because, you know, sometimes the descriptions are a little bit vague, and I can give you an example as we go through each piece of equipment, how they can be used on different tanks. So, number one, advanced repair system. So, of course, this reduces the repair time of your vehicle by 25%. So, this in effect is if you, for example, got tracked within the game, whereby, you know, you're stuck in place, your tracks would repair 25% quicker. Same as if you had a broken gun, for example, it would repair 25% quicker. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory with this one, but this is really useful, for example, if you're playing in something like a T95 or a non-turreted vehicle, where maybe if you were to get tracked, you would then need to repair that track really quickly to be able to deal with whatever it is that might be in front of you or trying to get around you. So this is where advanced repair system can come in quite nicely. But do I ever use it on any of my vehicles? No, not really, because it is a kind of a very niche, very kind of unique perk that's not or equipment that's not really going to help out you that much, and the amount of scenarios that it can help out is a lot less than maybe some of the other equipment that you can use, so it's a kind of a lower priority. And then we move into Spoolliner. Now, Spoolliner is a very niche and one that I actually do use on a few tanks. And essentially what it does is it increases the amount of damage that you're going to be dealing, and it also increases your defense from explosions. So this counts for example, artillery shells if they miss you. It doesn't count if you were to receive a direct hit from an artillery, but for example, if the round was to land next to your vehicle, then you would take half the damage than you would as normal. So this is kind of really nice. It definitely will help you out. But is it like super OP? No, but I guess the key thing with Spoolliner is you can use it in tanks, for example, that are really good at ramming. And so an example of that, I believe, if we've still got it equipped, is in the T54 lightweight. So this is a fast, light vehicle that I use Spoolliner on, because if you come up against enemy light tanks, you'll be able to deal 50% more damage to them when you ram them. And of course, when you weigh something like a T54, ramming into things like Batchet 12Ts, you're ramming into maybe the AMX 1390, the G-Saw, or somewhere in that region, you know, the really light paper, basically, tanks in the game, and even some mediums, the extra 50% ramming damage is massive, and you can end up adding on an extra 500 damage. And it can be used in more aggressive tanks, as well as avoiding the artillery shells that may or may not come in and reducing the damage that you take, as well as also reducing the chance of you being basically taking one of your crew members out of your tank. So if someone hits you, you may receive less damage to your crew member, which means they might have got taken out, but instead you will actually survive the hit. So this is something that is also like an additional benefit. But overall, Spoolliner I would only really use in ramming build tanks, and maybe some of the really big heavy tanks, something like a Maus potentially, but even then I don't think it's that useful. I think the key thing would be for a super heavy would be the reduced damage from maybe artillery missing you, which is kind of the big thing. But yeah, Spoolliner, very novel. Things like the Panzer V4 will use it, and any ramming build tanks. Now, what else do we have? Well, we've got Advanced Optics, and Advanced Optics is one of the best ones that you can pick, really, if you're playing any vehicle that wants to get its view range to a decent standard, and that is because it increases your view range by 10%, and 10% is pretty massive when it comes to World of Tanks, because it's the difference between being able to spot an opponent without them spotting you and you being spotted without being able to spot them. So you could be taking damage, or you could find someone and they take damage, and it also allows you to get assistance damage because you'll be able to spot further in the game and therefore maybe highlight some other people in the game that might not have been spotted previously. So I always use coated optics or advanced optics on pretty much all of my light tanks unless I'm trying something novel or unique. You can see here the RU's got it. You're also seeing the 1390 with it. You're also seeing the WZ with it as well. And you'll also note that most of my medium tanks will also have anything from like tier 8 where we actually have perks, also have advanced optics in them. And even some of my heavy tanks, if I think that they've got an okay level of base view range and I want to boost it up even further, I will also use some advanced optics as well. So it's a really, really good perk, and it's basically rivaled by very, very few within the kind of perk space. And so, yeah, I think it's one of the most important things that you can have, aside from maybe some of the others that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But follow closely on, you've got advanced concealment. Now this is a similar sort of thing to advanced optics in the way that it works to kind of help you in your gameplay. And that is that when you've got advanced optics, you increase your view range. When you've got advanced concealment, you reduce your detectability. So, for example, advanced concealment works as, it depends on what tank class you have. So I believe light tanks are most affected by it, or TDs are most affected by it. Then it's the vice versa if it's tank destroyers that are most affected by the advanced concealment. I'm sure someone probably knows in the comment section down below, but essentially it's either light tanks or tank destroyers, and then the second one is the opposite, and then the third will be medium tanks, then I believe it's heavy tanks and artillery. So advanced concealment basically works by giving you a reduction in the still concealment. So if we actually want to showcase how it works, and if you don't already know, is that if, for example, I was to look at this M41 Walker Bulldog as an example. So you're seeing here on the right hand side of the screen, still concealment 337. If we then add on advanced concealment, it will then reduce it. So we went from 337 all the way down to 297. So that's a 30 meters reduction. And then, for example, like we talked about with advanced optics, we can boost the view range up. So if you combine them both together, you can both increase your view range and reduce the chance of you getting detected, essentially as well. So you can boost your camo whilst also improving your sight lines. So you become even more overpowered at spotting within the game. So this is a very, very common kind of combination that you'll use in your equipment, and on pretty much most light vehicles. That is the case. Of course, unlike the PC version of the game, this version of the game does not require you to actually be still for advanced concealment to work. It works constantly, whether you're moving, whether you're still, whether you're firing on the move and spamming out rounds left, right and centre. It doesn't matter. So yeah, that's something that you guys will find out if you do decide to try this out. And I highly recommend using it on most mediums and light tanks and even tank destroyers as well. It can be really, really effective, especially if they have reasonable camo in the first place. And you'll see that with things like the E25 here, using both advanced optics and still concealment to be able to end up with double the view range than it does have still concealment. So really, really good use. Now then, the next one, advanced suspension. So this is something I would never use on any of my vehicles ever within the game. I mean, maybe in the case that you really want to create like an untrackable build in the T95 and you just want to stomp through opponents. I mean, it is what it is. It could be potentially useful, but it only increases your track durability by 50%, so effectively people will have to hit your tracks 50% more, and it's not actually 50% more because it's just the health of the tracks, so it might just be that you may end up going from 1 shot to be able to track you to 2 shots to be able to track you. Or it may mean that you go from 2 to 3, or if you're at the low end of the 2 like damage range, then it may still end up being 2 shots to track you. So you kind of have to test it out a little bit, depending on the tank that you're playing. But yeah, that's effectively what it is. And also it reduces the damage that you take from falling off things by 50%. So, I mean, if you wanted to use it, maybe it'd be useful. But for me, I never really use this on any tank that I play ever because the other boosts are just better. Now then, moving on, we've got improved ventilation, and this is always a toss-up within World of Tanks, and that's because improved ventilation basically increases your crew performance. And what that means is that, for example, your crew means your gunner, which means your reload. So it increases your reload by 5%. It also increases your view range by 5%. It also increases the repair speed of your tracks by 5%. And it's all of these minor little things that when you're adding 5% onto a load of different things, it's really, really handy. And that's where improved ventilation, much like the perk Brothers in Arms, or as it's now called on console, I believe it's called something else. I think it's like a Born Leader. Effectively, it's the same sort of thing, but for the equipment. So it's really, really useful. I tend to use it on my vehicles where maybe it's fairly all-round in itself, maybe medium tanks and sometimes tank destroyers if I want to reduce reloads or something like that, even further after using Advanced Loader. So a really, really good perk or equipment slot. So I would usually take this 90% of the time. Then we've then got the best perk in the game, in my opinion, or equipment, sorry, I keep calling them perks, but Advanced Loader is effectively a 10% reduction in your reload speed. So instead of it taking 10 seconds for you to reload, it would take 9, for example. And that means that when you look at your damage per minute, which you can do if you go to the module or whatever it is, any of these like ladder tabs, press Y, it will come up with this big statistic screen. In the bottom right, or the where we are now, the right hand side at the very top of the column, in the primary, it says damage per minute, 3,666. So this is where it will boost it up. So effectively, the maximum amount of damage, if you were to fire every single time instantaneously as you reload, you would deal 3,666 damage. Now, that's very rarely the case that you'll deal that, but that is the upper limit that you can ever reach, the maximum limit even. So adding the kind of bonuses that are in the form of Advanced Loader, that'll boost that up even further. And that's where you can use it on things like the Tortoise to make them like super OP within the game. So they go from having very, very good DPM to outrageous levels of DPM. And that's really where it comes in to kind of force. And that's why I really do enjoy doing things like that. You can see here the Tortoise with 3,916 damage per minute. So for example, if I now go along and actually sell my loader, Advanced Loader, which I'll do here just for the sake of this video, we can then look and the damage per minute's gone down to 3,524. So it's reduced quite significantly. Then we put it back on, as you can see, and then we're back up to 3,900. So this is really, really useful for pretty much any of the long reload tanks, things like the FV4005. I would really highly recommend you have this on. It cannot be used on autoloaders, so you cannot use it on autoloaders, so don't even try and bother. You want to be using it on any of the vehicles that you feel like you really need that DPM boost. Maybe if they've just got awful damage per minute, then maybe it would be nice to have the extra 10%. So this is stuff you can use as well. Now then, if you can't use Advanced Loader, you're then probably looking in the region of some of the other perks or equipment, and that comes in the form of enhanced or advanced gun laying drive. Now this increases the shell aiming speed, so if you're looking down the scope and you've maybe just fired, it's the speed at which it will take for that circle to reduce to the minimum size by 12%. So this is very, very, it's one of those things people think is really important, but actually in the game isn't that important. The most important thing is that your actual accuracy in the game, so the minimum size of that circle is as small as possible, because having 12% faster aiming speed when you're looking at like a 2-second aiming speed, that's only 0.2 of a second, so it's very, very minor, and it's not really going to be the leading reason as to why you aren't dealing as much damage as maybe you could, when you, for example, could then consider, well, you could reload 10% faster, so for every 10 shots you take, you could shoot another one. I would much rather have advanced loader after advanced gun laying drive. So this is always a kind of trap that I feel like people go down and get advanced gun laying drive. Granted, if you have an absolutely long shell aiming time, then maybe it would be worth it. If your aiming time is horrendous, if it's like 4 seconds, maybe this would be worth it. But for me, I would never really use this ever in the game. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion. Then we have reinforced ammo rack. It is what it is. It basically improves the durability of your ammo rack, so you can take more hits to your ammo rack without really ever needing to repair it or whatever it might be. It's not that big, and I never really use it either. And then you've got reinforced fuel tank, much the same. Fuel tank durability increased by 50%. Very, very, in my opinion, pointless. Like 90% of the time you get set on fire. Like, it might ruin one of your games in every 20 games. And even then you can still carry on fighting. It's just like you kind of act as if you've been hit by a FV4005 at the beginning of the game. You kind of use it in that way. But it's very rare that it comes up and really is such a negative that I would choose it over having 10% a lower reload or 10% more view range in every single one of my games constantly, and I don't have to ever worry about it. So that's my opinion. Same with engine durability. This is probably the least worth one. And then, yeah, just don't use that either. And then we've got traction system. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. This is where maybe your own personal judgment comes into play. So traction system increases your max speed and your chassis and hull rotation speed by 10%. So max speed, for example, this is always something that kind of catches people out. So if I grab my IS-7, for example, if I find it somewhere here, IS-7, here we go. It says I can go 72 kilometers an hour. Now, I can tell you that is an absolute lie. You cannot go 72 kilometers an hour usually. I mean, down a hill, you can go 72 kilometers an hour. But in essence, you could get up to the top speed, but if you don't have the horsepower to actually get up to the top speed, you'll never get there. This is just like the max speed, as opposed to top speed. And that means that, yeah, effectively you can have 72 kilometers an hour, but you may never actually get there on the flat because the tank doesn't have the horsepower to get up to that top speed. And so, that being said, if, for example, you're playing in a light tank, sometimes your light tank has more than enough horsepower to be able to get above and beyond the max speed that it might be at the beginning, which means that adding on 10% extra kind of speed, that is going to literally boost your speed by 10%. So this can be really, really useful. And granted, on the i7, it may be useful if you want a ramming build. But in kind of order of which I would rather have, I would probably choose the advanced powertrain just so that you get max speed by 5% and also your horsepower by 5%. So you'll maintain your speed on all of the different terrains in the game, whether that be grass, whether that be a road, whether it be, I don't know, trenches or swampland. It will increase your kind of consistency of keeping your speed throughout the entirety of all of those terrains. So that's where it comes in useful, whereas traction system just increases your top speed. But if, for example, you're in a swamp and you can only go 20 kilometers an hour, you're not going to be able to get up to 72 kilometers an hour anyway. The one good thing, however, about traction system, whilst we're on it, is that the chassis and hull rotation speed, this can be actually really, really good, because that means that if you're in, for example, a really immobile heavy tank, you can turn a lot quicker. So this is really good for maybe something like, I don't know, a Jaegeru or an E100, or something that you feel like you're going to get out-traversed in, because that just basically means you're going to be able to turn 10% quicker, which means you may not get caught out as much by light tanks, by medium tanks who are trying to out-traverse you and get around the side. So this is something that is really, really good for that sort of scenario, but maybe less good for some of the light tanks, because it can actually end up acting negatively in the fact of something like a T50-2, which is a tier 6. I feel like it might be bombarding you with lots of information, but it's kind of stuff you can rewatch, you can have a look back on the video, you can kind of go over the bits that maybe you didn't understand, but essentially this tank is really, really quick. It turns really quick anyway. So if you increase it even more, you end up with a scenario where the back end of your tank is coming out sideways every single time you try and turn, and you can end up drifting and you can end up toppling yourself over because you've got that too fast of a speed. And that's something that the T50-2, especially since it's quite slimline, will also have that problem. So it's a trade-off sometimes with the equipment, and you've got to think of what tank am I playing, is it actually going to work with it, and if you base your kind of decision making off of that, then you'll come out really, really well, and you don't really have to worry a massive amount. So this is stuff that I highly recommend you kind of take advantage of in the game and use to your advantage. So with both of those out of the way, we then have a really novel and unique one, which is Advanced Reload. Now, Advanced Reload, for the most part, in most vehicles, is probably not that useful because, for example, in the T50-2, you fire one shell, you're basically reloaded with another one by the time you even have a thought to change to the next shell. So, Advanced Reload itself allows you to swap between the ammo types that you have for free. So it doesn't reset your reload back to 0 as it would normally. You'll just, for example, if you're fully loaded with an AP round, you'll be able to swap to a premium round, which may be heat, without costing the reload. So, for example, if you've got a 20-second reload and you realise, oh no, I've got HE loaded or something, and I'm coming up against the Maus, I'm never going to be able to pen the Maus with a HE round, I need to get an APCR round. Now I have to wait 20 seconds to be able to get it again. That's not good. And then you kind of have to weigh it up in that way where, like, is my tank's reload so long to the point where you're going to have to reload such a long time that it might actually end up getting you removed from the game and back in the garage? And that's what I find with something like the FV4005, whereby I can swap between my AP rounds if I really know I'm not going to pen something, or if I really need to pen something and the HESH rounds extra damage is not needed, then I can swap between these two without having to worry. This also, unfortunately, guys, does work for artillery pieces, which means you can swap between your AP rounds or your HE rounds, and essentially just pen anything or deal a lot of damage to one thing, basically, or multiple things if you miss them and actually end up dealing more damage than if you were to pen the vehicle that you're aiming at. But yeah, that's kind of how artillery works with that perk as well. So it can be used on loads of different things, not just tank destroyers. It can be used on any vehicle. The only problem it can't be used on is autoloaders, which it's just not possible to use. It won't be an option in the game, which means you'll have to pick from some of the other perks in the game, or equipment, sorry. And yeah, that's kind of where equipment is. Now, I hopefully gave a good understanding of what each of the equipment is useful for and what sort of tanks you want to take advantage of each bit of equipment in the game. Of course, things like the Excalibur here that you're seeing, when I was grinding towards 100% marks of excellence, I used the camo and concealment build with improved ventilation, which also increases your view range, to rely on getting spotting damage as well as assistance damage, and just basically remaining hidden throughout my games to avoid getting hit, because this tank has no armor. So these are things that you can use in your own mentality. I cannot just give you a blanket, this is the T110E3, you should use this. This is the T110E4, that you should use this, etc., etc. for every tank in the game. It would just be way too long. But yeah, the underlying mythology of basically actually picking the perks is hopefully what I've given you within this, and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to pick your equipment as you expect to. Yeah, hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you want to check out some of the actual perks rather than what I've been calling perks in this game, which are the crew skills, then I highly recommend you check out this guide, which goes through every single crew skill within the game, looking at like things that you should be picking on your various different tanks, much like this video. And then on the right hand side there will be how to get better at World of Tanks as to the gameplay proportion of the video game that is World of Tanks console. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I hope you join me in the next one. Goodbye.